So a lot of those migrants were sent to various cities, and they strained public resources and all that. So I think that's where the political support is coming from. But aside from like Donald Trump's core supporters, people do not support what he has been doing. They do not support ripping student visas away from students for writing an op-ed, or kicking out legal residents, or they just stopped a guy at the airport who has a U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
And started searching his phone, and then someone else was coming back from Canada, U.S. citizen, for 10 years, and they detained him and put him in handcuffs and searched his phone. I mean, it's absurd.
Right.
And I think the reason that the Trump administration is doing this is they could have an immigration regime where they deported a lot more undocumented immigrants than Joe Biden did. And they do have the authority to do that. The president does have a broad authority and a lot of power over immigration. But what the president doesn't have is the power to round up people off the street, throw them in the back of a van, send them to a foreign country, into a foreign prison, into a fucking gulag there, and then say, oh, can't bring them back. Or even if we acknowledge that we made a mistake, can't bring them back.
So knowing that he has all of this leeway, that he had all of this political capital to expend on his strongest issue, and knowing that he could actually do what he said he was going to do and go after these undocumented, hardened criminals, why within the first 100 days of your administration do you go after legal residents who have committed no crime? Do you go after American citizens? Do you go after elementary school kids? I mean, kids are getting plucked out of fucking elementary school and getting there are anecdotal instances where the whole town had to band together to get these kids out of detention centers because they're getting pulled out of their schools. And so why expend your political capital knowing that what you were doing would already have the vast majority of support among your base and probably a good swath of the American people, to instead do something that, to your exact point and to Elliot Morris's point, isn't going to have any semblance of broad support?
So I think I can't get inside their mind.
I was just going to say not to tell you to get inside of Trump's head, but
here's a few possibilities. One possibility is that they don't give a shit about public opinion. And when you're doing this many deportations at once, and you're trying to have these many, you're going to make a ton of mistakes, and they just don't care about the mistakes because they also don't want to back down from anything, never apologize, never say you're wrong, never back down. That sort. I also think Stephen Miller is running this. Stephen Miller doesn't like legal immigrants, not just undocumented immigrants.
Right.
He said that he wants less legal immigration. He said during the first Trump term, and then during the campaign, Stephen Miller has talked about the next step being denaturalizations, which is people who are citizens of the United States that they're going to put through proceedings to strip away the citizenship. And this is very hard to do. It's quite a long process. But one of the reasons you can strip away someone's citizenship is if they committed fraud on their form when they tried to become a citizen, or if they engaged in terrorism, which is important because now you're seeing the Trump administration starting to say everything is terrorism.
Right.
If you burn a Tesla, you're a terrorist.
Correct. You reverse engineer a rationale for them to be able to then point to so that you can round up the most people under that rationale.
And then the darkest possibility is that they want to run a country more like a totalitarian state, more like a police state, where not only immigrants but anyone who disagrees with them, anyone who challenges them, could be deported, could be stripped of their citizenship, could be detained. And what they want to do is just pick a few people, and they like the attention they're getting on this because they want to scare the shit out of everyone else.
Right.
They want to scare immigrants. They want to scare people who may challenge the administration. And by lifting up these stories, they don't know. It's not because they think I heard someone say, like, oh, the Trump administration wants to be talking about this. I think they do want to be talking about this, but not necessarily because they are secure in how popular it is. I think they want to be talking about this because they want people scared.
Right. It has a chilling effect,
Yes.
and they know that. I'm curious about the implications now of the fact that this is all being done in defiance of a Supreme Court ruling. Again, already bizarre that the hill they would choose to die on would be something where they would tack right on Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. This was a unanimous ruling against the Trump administration. So when you position yourself to the right of those two guys on the Supreme Court, I think that shows the extent to which you've lost the plot. But how are you thinking about this now? We've we had this conversation about the prospect of a constitutional crisis, and there are two ways to think about this. One, from the legal perspective, it doesn't happen until the Supreme Court issues a ruling that the executive branch opts to defy. But the other one is just more broadly speaking, and of fucking course we're in a constitutional crisis because of literally everything that Trump is looking to do. But in any case, now both of those buckets are full. Now whether you're talking legally or not, we're clearly there. And so how are you thinking about this in terms of next steps, living in a country where it's clear by virtue of what he's doing that Trump wants to usurp all power from the judicial branch and the legislative branch, sees himself as all powerful, and isn't going to let any rulings or decisions handed down from a co-equal branch of government stop him from what he wants to do?
I think we're going to find out because there's one more turn here, which is this will end up back at the Supreme Court, I think. Because the Supreme Court could have written a decision where they said, you must bring him home. You must take every step to bring him home. Just do it, right? What the Supreme Court said is the lower court order properly requires the government to facilitate his release. Everyone's been saying return, but it's facilitate his release from this prison. And then handle his case as it would have been handled had they not made this mistake, right? So, and then they said, the lower court also says effectuate his release. And that they have to be more specific about, and you do have to have deference to the administration's conduct of foreign affairs. So it may exceed that, but we'll leave that to the lower court. But the part that they aren't not leaving to the lower court and they're just saying yes to is you have to take steps to facilitate his release.
Yeah.
The Trump administration then used the court trying to say, well, this you've got to be clearer on, and there is some deference to foreign affairs. They've used that to be like, oh, we won. We actually won 9-0. So it's interesting because the Trump administration did not want to say the Supreme Court made its decision and now let them enforce it, which is J.D. Vance's favorite line attributed to Andrew Jackson that he has said before. So they didn't say that. So they're not like openly defying the Supreme Court. They're doing something even more sinister and frustrating, which is just pretending that the Supreme Court order is in their favor. And saying that, oh, well, they want us to, the Supreme Court order, we're not going to go into El Salvador and bring this guy back home and return him. It's like, well, they're not saying, they would actually, if they opened the door of that prison and let Garcia walk out of the prison into El Salvador, the Supreme Court order would be fulfilled.
Yeah.
That would be it. They would be like, he's not going to come back here and live in Maryland ever again, blah, blah, blah. You know what? If Garcia comes back here, the Trump administration can deport him. They can go through deportation proceedings, and he'll get his day in court. But if they find it, they could just deport him again to El Salvador, maybe, or to a third country. But he wouldn't be locked up in prison for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
So I do think on the constitutional crisis, this will get back to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will have to decide, hey, man, hey, all of you got to be a little more specific. Now, maybe they weren't as specific in that first ruling because that's how they got it to be unanimous, right? There was no noted dissents, right? Because it wasn't like a 9-0 decision because it was an unsigned report, but there was no noted dissent, so everyone was. But to get that agreement, you wonder if they had to be a little more circumspect. I think when it comes back to the Supreme Court, then the Supreme Court's going to have to make a real decision. Are they going to draw the red line? And they could be unwilling to draw the red line, at least they have up to this point, because they are worried. Roberts might be worried that if they draw the red line and then Trump goes over the red line, then that's it, and there's no turning back. And that's you're right. We're in like a rolling constitutional crisis, but that is the moment where the Supreme Court is very specific about what Trump needs to do, and then Trump says no.
The notion that John Roberts would not put forward a specific ruling for fear of the executive branch defying the Supreme Court is a constitutional crisis unto itself. If you are basically falling victim to the same chilling effect that Trump is trying to put forward to everybody else, and you are a co-equal branch of government, then that's the whole ballgame right there. Then that is the courts basically bowing to Trump, cowing to Trump, and basically saying, we are afraid that you won't comply, and so as a result of that, we are not going to put us in the position where you have the opportunity to do that publicly.
Yeah, and they have not done that yet, and maybe Roberts is thinking, I got to pick my moments, and I got to pick the moment where I really have to draw the line, and this isn't it, and maybe Roberts and some others on the court were surprised that the Trump administration wouldn't even say, which they could, by the way, could have done this. They could have said, we took a bunch of steps And this Bukele guy, he is not releasing him, and he said